I am the Space Quest historian, and I keep waving my hands for some reason. You're about to see a clip from an interview that I did with Aaron Connors, the writer of Tex Murphy from Under a Killing Moon and onwards, and also the author of the novels based on the Tex Murphy series. I did this interview with my good chum, Richard Cobbett. We previously did a series of videos on the Tex Murphy novels, sort of a comparison between game and novel, and they were great fun. And Aaron Connors then reached out to me and said, "Do you know what? If you're going to talk Tex Murphy novels and Tex Murphy game versus novel and all that shit, why not invite the guy who actually wrote this shit?" So we did. And it was a great interview. We actually did two interviews. The first one was a relatively spoiler-free interview, which doesn't reveal any major surprises from either the games or the novels. And that interview is what you're going to see clips from in the future. So I'm going to show you a series of clips. The first one is the one you're going to watch now, and then I'll be doling out some other clips from that interview later down the line, like a couple of days, weeks, whatever. The second interview that we did was much more spoiler full. It is chock full of spoilers from the novels, especially, also the games, although I kind of imagine most of you watching this have played the games already, but definitely the novels. And the novels take a much more interesting approach to the storytelling than the games. I'm not saying the games are bad or anything, but they take a much more nuanced and much more elaborate take on the game's story. And there are a fair number of spoilers there, particularly the novel The Romanov Enigma, which is basically an entirely new Tex Murphy story. So we get into some major spoiler weeds in that second interview, and to get the pleasure, air quotes I suppose, the pleasure of actually watching that interview, you'll have to go to Aaron Connors' website, aaronconnors.net, and I don't know, preferably pick up a copy of one of the novels, or all of them, I don't know. We are keeping that second interview sort of under wraps, but the full first interview, if you can't be bothered to watch these clips that I'm going to show, if you want to watch the full interview, no edits, no nothing, then you can just hop onto my second channel, the Dumping Grounds, youtube.com/@SQH Dump. Don't worry, I've put a title on the screen somewhere here. So anyway, enjoy this first clip. I'll keep the introductions to the following clips very short, or not even bother doing one at all. I haven't decided. Anyway, enjoy. Mr. Aaron Connors joined Access Software around the time of Under a Killing Moon. Actually, a bit before that, but Under a Killing Moon was the first game you had an active writing involvement in. So what were your impressions of the first two games in the Tex Murphy series? And did you play them before joining Access, or was that sort of like a required reading before you kicked into Under a Killing Moon?
I had not played them prior to joining Access Software. In fact, I didn't have a PC, so I would not be capable of playing a game. I was a true Luddite. I held out as long as I could against actually using a word processing program. I was still using an electric typewriter when I was in college. So I got dragged kicking and screaming into the technical age. Was hired at Access in 1991, and they were working on Amazon Guardians of Eden at the time. So it was in between Mean Streets and Martian Memorandum. But they were just wrapping it up. And then, as you know very well, I actually just played a character in Martian Memorandum.
Mon Dieu, what the hell are you doing here?
The best character in the game, obviously.
The finest French accent that money can't buy.
Well, that was exactly it. They were looking for someone who could do an impeccable French accent and it had long hair. So, and that was actual real hair. So I think that's what got me the part. So
actual real beret too?
That was an actual beret. It was. It was not attached to the hair as you suspected in the case.
I always kind of loved Access's casting, for those early games. That for the most part, the credits are split up into exactly two types of people: assistant programmer and someone with a name like Candy Stripes.
You're not wrong.
Yes. So no playing of the game. So how did you, beyond, of course, charming your way in with your impeccable French accent, how did you charm your way into becoming the writer for Under a Killing Moon?
So the backstory on this is it's just such a random little thing, but I had a friend in high school and we had a chemistry class together, and I hated both the subject and the teacher.
And the friend.
Just made it the worst subject to learn, and I've been told it's actually quite a fascinating subject, but he turned me off to it forever. And to keep myself from going insane, I started composing an epic poem about him and his pet snake, which he didn't actually have a pet snake. But and every day I would just write a couple more stanzas, and I would do my very crude illustrations, and I filled, a big chunk of a notebook full of this thing. And my friend who sat next to me would see me writing, and he asked me one day what I was doing, and he read it and laughed his ass off and said, "That is amazing." This friend became a programmer, graduated from college, went to work for Access Software. I had not spoken to him in probably 5 years. And he realized that the games they were making could use someone with a little better writing experience, or talent, maybe. And so he reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming to work at the software company?" And I said, "Well, I must warn you, I know nothing about computers, literally." He said, "No, I think they need your creativity." So they got me on, and I was just doing tech support for the first couple of months, just to kind of how ironic.
Hang on a moment. Hello, you've reached Access Software. Yes, my game doesn't work. Too bad.
Have you tried?
Or alternatively, I can't help you with that, but I can write you a fantastic acrostic.
Exactly.
So,
but as it turned out, this friend of mine also thought that Chris Jones and I would get along really well, which turned out to be an understatement. I went in and met with Chris and gave him some background on some creative projects that I had done. I'd grown up making board games my entire life. I was obsessed with video games, as in the arcade style. And then, of course, I had my lyric poem about Javon Bennett, my chemistry teacher.
and
I had actually started writing and hosting murder mystery parties when I was in college. And so I had done about a dozen of those, where I would write the story, I'd write all of the characters' parts, I'd lay out the timeline and kind of oversee the whole party interaction. And they were very successful. Like, people were, when they find out about them, they'd want to be a part of them, and it turned out to be a really fun experience. But it also prepared me really well for interactive writing. So I showed Chris one of those murder mysteries, invited him to one of the parties, and he said, "How'd you like to take a crack at the story for our next game?" Which at that point was Under a Killing Moon.
Wow. And all he said was just like, "No snakes. Can we try and keep snakes out of it?"
Yeah, when we said we wanted Python-esque humor, we were... So how much of Under a Killing Moon was written at the time? Because obviously the style of that game versus Pandora especially are like night and day, in terms of, like, Joachim's more of an outright comedy for the most part. The stories obviously are structured a lot differently. So I'm just kind of curious, like, how much of it was there when you got started?
So I don't even remember where the seed of the idea came from, but Chris and I, once we became friends, we would just hang out all the time and just talk, and it probably came out of one of our conversations of, "Hey, it'd be cool if we did this and this and this." And so I went away to write my first game story, having absolutely no idea what that entailed, and came back and had a big old summary written up. Chris read through it and he goes, "I love it. Now we got to cut it by about 2/3." And so that's why some of the sequences that are in the novel of Under a Killing Moon are there, because they were cool sequences I thought would look great in the game, but weren't able to make the cut.
I mean, it's one of the reasons why I like the original Under a Killing Moon. I think I prefer Pandora overall, but I like the fact that the original just isn't like a step-by-step retelling of the game, which kind of is that basically, like, books based on games tend to be one of two things. They're either complete insanity, or they're basically an incredibly drawn out walkthrough. And I quite liked how Under a Killing Moon was like sort of slipping in those extra scenes, especially like around sort of GRS and so on. The additional characters who were clearly cut out of the original game. It actually made it like worth reading if you knew the original game, which in a lot of cases I read the book based on the game. It's like, why does this exist? It doesn't add anything. And then I liked how Pandora did the same thing, but it was a lot. The transitions were a lot smoother. It kind of had that more of a sense of being a novelization rather than a step by step run through the game.
Yeah, everything about the sequencing of the stories in our series, both in the games and books, is all out of whack, as Trolls and I have talked about at length. It didn't seem like anything really went in sequence as it was supposed to. So the story behind the game story versus the book story of the first two games I worked on was that we had done Under a Killing Moon when I was approached about writing a novelization of it. But I, after having gone through the process of writing the story for Under a Killing Moon, decided in my mind the best way to get a coherent narrative was to just write it out like a book. And so I had actually started writing the story for Pandora as a novel, and I was, 6 or 7 chapters in. And when I was contacted by Primo Publishing, and so I told them what was going on, and they said, well, let's see what you've got for the other book. So I sent them the first few chapters. They go, we love it. Let's do a 2-book deal. So I actually finished the Pandora Directive book before the game. That's why it's so much closer to the actual game, because we had the full story all laid out, and so we didn't have to tweak it that much to incorporate it. But then I went back and did the novelization of Under a Killing Moon and said, okay, now I get to put in a lot of these other things that I wanted to do. Plus, the experience of having written a full-length book, which I'd never done before, I think helped me with kind of the structure and flow of Under a Killing Moon.
Mon Dieu, what the hell are you doing here?